Future lives is an area that I do get into occasionally. Some of my colleagues enjoy working a lot with progression. That's the difference. It's progression instead of regression. And I've heard some interesting, I've had people who have been on starships because they're seeing into the future. A lot of times, though, I don't like working in the future, even when a client is able to talk to me a little about it, because of the fact that I think from a karmic lesson standpoint, it's better that they not know what's coming up. I feel, again, a lot of importance really comes by our discovering and problem solving when the issue is right in front of us. So I'm a little hesitant to spend too much time with that, although I've had many clients who've talked to me, for instance, about the 21st, 22nd century, how overcrowded the next century is going to be on Earth, and how there's going to be a lot of air pollution, and how it's not going to be real easy living around here. In fact, it's made my wife and I come to the conclusion, I think we'll wait a century before we reincarnate together again. But I must tell you, too, that the fact of time often comes into this. People who ask me questions about whether it's possible to see into the future are suddenly confronted by this business of time, the past, present, and future, all being capsulized into one action. And this is confusing for them. It doesn't bother them so much when we talk about past lives and our current life. But when we get into the future, they begin to see that, in fact, all time there's not an absolute to time. It's not a chronology like it is on Earth. But in fact, when we are in the spirit world, we're able to see into the future as well as the past. If we were not able to do this, we would not be able to select our bodies and to know a little bit about what's going to happen to us, so that we, in fact, can make the determination that this body is going to be right for us. So, as of necessity, people have to come to this philosophic concept that, in fact, past, present, and future is all relative. There's been a lot of work done in recent years by people who are very scientifically oriented on this. A whole new field of quantum mechanics, where they believe that everything is electromagnetic light, energy, and that time is essentially motion and not chronology, has come into play, where people have had, I think, a greater understanding as quite possible that there is no real relevance to past, present, and future as far as chronology on Earth. It's difficult for us to accept this because we see the sun come up in the morning, go down at night, there's night and day, we age, we see everything changing around us. So for us, it's chronology. Time is very important as an absolute, but it's not true in the spirit world. When they decide, and their guides are also involved in this decision, that it's time to come forward and be reincarnated again, they go to a place where they can study the bodies that they're going to be given as choices. Now, I find this varies between clients. Some clients are given 2 or 3 choices, other clients are given basically 1 choice, but I have almost never found a client who has said, I don't like that choice. Their guides and masters know too much about them, too much about what needs to be done to make mistakes in this area. So I find most people are very joyful when they see the bodies that they're going to inhabit in their next life. They look almost as if they go into a television studio or a movie theater and see in stop action certain aspects of the life to come, to see whether their soul will fit into the personality of the body that they're going to inhabit, and see how that will work in terms of their coming forward. Now, I'd like to say that it's an extremely important part of my work to understand how the soul mind of my client is interfacing with their earthly mind in the ego of the body, the brain in which they're now incarnating as a person in this particular life. Because, as I mentioned before, we have different soul egos that combine with different bodies. And it's true that in the womb, when we're analyzing what this mind is like and how we might combine with it, there is a duality. Once we are born, that fusion has taken place. It is not as if the soul is an alien form. That baby recognizes this intelligent life and welcomes it. After all, if we were to take the soul out say, a human body, we would probably have raw emotions. There would be a survival instinct. We'd have aggression. We'd have passivity. All those things which are influential to a soul. But emotions are very peculiar to a body. A soul has to learn how to cope with that. So the soul brings to the body intuition, imagination, a concept of morality, these sorts of things. So this is very important when a soul is looking at that new body and deciding whether this body is going to really be right for them. So what happens after this viewing period is over, souls go back and say goodbye to their soulmates and their soul groups and their guides, and then they are brought forward into that new body in the womb of their mothers. My clients describe death as something that is very, very beautiful for them. The trauma that has just gone before is pretty much wiped out at the moment of death. They rise out of their bodies, they realize that they're an immortal being. "Oh my God, I'm not dead," is a statement I hear quite often. And they look back at their bodies, and of course all of their memories of all of who they are as souls and all their past lives come crashing in, and they realize that this life they have just lived is transitory. Not that they can't feel sadness for the husband and wife who is at their bedside, for example, or a child. But souls don't feel sadness the same way human beings do, because they're immortal beings. They understand that they will soon be joined by these folks they've left behind. And I can tell you this, that most people feel two things. They feel freedom and they feel joy at the moment of death. The disturbed souls are those that may have been murdered, for example, or may have lived very, very traumatic lives. They're very unhappy. The soul, if you will, has been contaminated by the human body through all sorts of genetic, influences and environmental influences that has caused a very difficult life. Maybe also it's a young soul that has had a hard time coping with the particular difficulties of that mind, where a more advanced soul could get through it. There's all sorts of reasons for souls being disturbed in their bodies, and that's one of the primary ones. I find the different levels of souls are generally on 3 different levels, although I can keep this simple and just say beginner and advanced. In my book, I describe them as beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and there are a couple of grades in between that, but that is a general category. I think that the thing that differentiates the beginner from the intermediate is essentially by the time you reach intermediate level, you're beginning your teacher training. You're given more responsibility. You've had a lot of lives that have been very difficult, and you've been very successful in your life in handling them. One of the primary things that our guides and teachers look at is how we have treated others in our life. What have we done for others as opposed to ourselves? And if we find people who are really quite unselfish and giving people, we know that probably they're moving into the intermediate level. And from the intermediate level to the advanced level is the difference between a soul being kind of at the beginning stage of teaching to one that is a more advanced teacher. And those souls that are more advanced are into work that is very, very demanding. Many of them will have a number of people with whom they are teaching who are on Earth and on other planets. And it is also their responsibility in the spirit world to, if you will, run spirit groups as teachers, and to conduct lessons, and to work with individual souls on their own problems. So there's quite a difference between a beginner and an advanced soul. Soulmates can be confusing to people. Of course, in the spirit world, I find, and I think I've explained this, that in a soul group, we have many soulmates. Our soul groups may be made up of 4 or 5 different people, or 25 or 30, depending on how quickly we're moving through into the more advanced stages. It could be argued that if your husband or wife is your soulmate, but it could also be argued that your best friend in high school is your soulmate, or your business partner, or whatever. And it may well be true that they are also soulmates and all come from your spirit group. For me, the most intense soulmate relationship is that being with whom we like to reincarnate in terms of a spouse, someone with whom we've been mated in many, many lives, and we often have changed genders. We've been in the male in one life and then a female in another. So this is another measure of the advancement of the soul, because I find too that if souls incarnate mostly as males or mostly as females, they haven't yet reached that intermediate level where they can interchange with ease. So soulmates are a very, very important aspect of our lives, and sometimes we learn our greatest lessons with our soulmates. Well, orientation is that aspect of going into the spirit world where you review your last life. You review what it is that you did right and what you did wrong. Transition is when you move into the spirit world to your place where you live with your other souls who are your group. And there may be other groups that you can see around you. And finally, the last area is when you move forward. That is the time of rebirth and embarkation, if you will. When the time that you have spent between lives now is completed and you're ready to tackle the next life and the next body and go forward with the next lesson that will give you basically purpose in your life.